The forest erupted with a scream unlike any the scouts had ever heard. Piercing, unnatural stretching across the dense canopy. Men froze mid-step, their rifles trembling and hand-hearts hammering. It was as if the forest itself had exhaled a sound meant to paralyze. Some later wrote that the wail seemed human, yet carried a terror no mortal voice could convey. Shadows twisted between the ancient pines, dancing in the early morning mist. A lone scout whispered, "It is calling us," or warning us. I cannot tell which. Singular disappearance haunted the journals of those who survived. Men vanished, leaving only the echo of that scream, faint footprints that led nowhere, campfires still glowing undisturbed, as if time itself had been frozen around their absence. Old photographs, fogged and scratched, reveal only vague outlines. Figures half hidden behind trees, smoke rising from a small fire. One image captures a scout raising his rifle, eyes wide, the background blurred by a swirling haze. The forest seems alive, breathing, watching, recording every move of those who dared to enter. In the journal's entries become frantic. Scribbled lines of fear. The cry came again at midnight, closer this time. It does not pause. It does not breathe. It waits. Lanterns flickered, shadows leapt, and a silence fell that weighed heavier than the night itself. Even the animals fled, leaving the men alone with the impossible sound. Locals spoke of the forest in hushed tones. They called it cursed, a place where spirits roamed freely, where the cries of the lost merged with the wind. Native guides warned explorers never to go alone, never to follow a strange sound. Those who ignored the advice did not return. Their fate unknown, erased save for whispers in taverns and scattered journals. The scouts' nightly watches became rituals of dread. Each twig's snap, each gust of wind made them flinch. Eyes darted to every shadow, rifles raised, yet the source remained elusive. The scream, inhuman and lingering, returned again and again, echoing off the rocks, bouncing through the valleys, searing itself into the memory of anyone who heard it. By dawn, the forest would appear calm, sunlight filtering softly through the trees. But the memory of the scream lingered, a ghostly residue over moss-covered logs and misty streams. And even decades later, when historians and folklorists pieced together accounts from journals, letters, and newspaper clippings, the opening cry of that night remained the most terrifying. A warning, a herald, something that refused to be understood. It was the autumn of 1883. The days were crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, the nights bitter with early frost. The location, a remote stretch of the Ozark wilderness, where winding creeks carved deep valleys and towering pines formed a canopy that swallowed sunlight. Mist clung stubbornly to the ground, curling around tree trunks, twisting into shapes that suggested movement where none existed. The men at the center of these accounts were a patrol of frontier scouts, seasoned veterans of the western frontier. Their leather uniforms, worn boots, mud-stained rifles slung over shoulders, eyes sharp and scanning. They had navigated these forests countless times, tracking wildlife, mapping terrain, and warning settlers of potential threats. Yet even their experience did little to prepare them for what they encountered that fall. The patrol was led by Sergeant William Harper, a man known for his composure under fire and an uncanny ability to read the land. With him were 8 other scouts, each skilled in survival, tracking, and combat. Their journals meticulously detailed every movement, every observation. But on this mission, their writings became fragmented, the lines trembling with fear. The objective of their expedition was routine: to patrol the western borderlands, report on settler activity, and ensure no hostile encampments lingered in the forests. Yet the environment itself seemed to conspire against them. Streams that had always been shallow now roared with unexpected force. Fallen trees blocked familiar paths, and the wind carried sounds that could not be identified. Local settlers and traders had whispered of the forest that listens. Tales handed down from native guides spoke of voices in the trees, cries echoing where no human could be, and shadows that moved independently of any known creature. Harper had dismissed these stories, at first a skeptic by nature. But he noted them in his journal, nonetheless, as a precaution, marking them as folklore, yet with an uneasy sense that there might be more truth than myth. By nightfall, the scouts established camp along a creek, the water reflecting faint moonlight through the mist. Fires were lit, rifles stacked within reach. The men spoke little, the silence punctuated only by the occasional crack of a branch underfoot or the distant call of an owl. Each scout was aware of the legend of the warnings. Each felt the forest watching, waiting, patient. In these early hours, the patrol's routine observations began to blur with the inexplicable. Flickers of movement in the shadows, shapes that shifted just beyond clear sight. The wind carried faint whispers, unintelligible, yet unmistakably deliberate. Even daylight brought no relief, the forest seemingly stretching further, denser, more oppressive. Harper recorded in his journal, "I have seen much in my years. Yet today the forest is alive in a manner I cannot name. It watches, it speaks, and I fear it knows our every thought." Thus the stage was set. A disciplined, experienced group of men, armed and vigilant. A remote, almost mythical forest, thick with fog and legend. And a presence unseen, yet profoundly felt, that would test their courage, their sanity, and leave a mark on history that blurred the lines between fact and folklore. The official records open with routine entries almost deceptively calm. Patrol departed base at 0600 hours. Terrain uneven. No immediate threats observed. On paper, nothing unusual, nothing to suggest what lay ahead. Yet even in these formal lines, the faint shadow of anomaly lurks, hinted in marginal notes by Sergeant Harper. Harper's journal reveals far more. On October 3rd, he writes, "We heard a wail at 0430. At first we thought it an animal. But its tone, its resonance, bore no resemblance to any known creature. It lingered, then retreated, then returned. The scouts paused, rifles raised, hearts hammering. Each man felt the weight of a presence unseen. County records preserve reports of missing men who vanished along the patrol's route. Scout Michael Reynolds did not return from reconnaissance. Last seen near Pine Ridge. Fate unknown. Singular disappearances repeated. A pattern emerging across weeks and miles. Newspapers of the era, sparse yet telling, describe the unexplained events of the Ozark forests. Articles speak of scouts and trappers disappearing, of mysterious cries echoing through valleys. Editors offered rational explanations, animals whined exaggeration, but the details in Harper's journal contradicted these dismissals. The scouts' nightly logs grew frantic. October 4th entry. The wail returned closer this time. It did not breathe, it did not pause. It observed. I cannot name it yet. All men felt its scrutiny. Discipline faltered as fear took root. A seasoned group of frontier men now questioned their senses. Military correspondence preserved in archives shows that Harper was instructed to maintain composure, to record all anomalies, and to return promptly. Yet his entries reveal a patrol stretched to its limits. Our men whisper in the darkness. Shadows move. Voices echo where no one stands. On October 5th, Private Samuel Klein vanished. Harper writes, Samuel went to the southern ridge at dusk. Never returned. Only his rifle remained upright, leaning against a fallen oak. No footprints. No struggle. Nothing but the echo of screams. A chilling template would repeat over subsequent days. Harper's sketches of the forest, annotated with red ink, mark locations of repeated auditory phenomena. Notes beside each marker. Sound originates from valley direction, inconsistent. Shadows observed moving independently of wind or light. Such maps suggest a systematic attempt to document the unexplained. Journal entries. detail the physical and psychological toll. Sleepless nights, trembling hands, strained eyesight from staring into shadowed trees. Scouts became hypervigilant, reacting to every snapped twig, every rustling leaf. The forest became an omnipresent adversary. Harper also recorded the reactions of his men. One scout whispered, "It watches. I swear it watches us. I feel it judging, waiting." Another refused to leave the fire circle alone, insisting the scream would return if he ventured too far. The subtle breakdown of discipline, the shared fear, speaks to the intensity of what they experienced. Archival letters sent to family members recount the same phenomena in hushed tones. Harper's wife received one letter. "The forest speaks at night. A cry not of man, not of beast. I pray for the safe return of all men, yet I fear." These personal accounts echo the formal records, adding emotional weight to the documented facts. Reports also describe physical traces. Disturbed moss, snapped branches, scorched patches near creek banks where the screams were loudest. Yet no footprints, no animal tracks. The evidence suggested an event real, tangible, but defying explanation. Newspapers occasionally printed eyewitness statements from local settlers and traders. "We heard it, a voice in the trees calling our names." Men who ventured too close disappeared without trace. While editors urged skepticism, these clippings combined with Harper's journal form a corroborative framework of fact. Weather records and topographical surveys were referenced to eliminate natural explanations. Storms had passed, wind was minimal. Echoes were localized. Each scream followed a path independent of natural conditions. Patterns emerged, repeating nightly like a deliberate sequence. Harper meticulously noted time and duration. One night, the scream began at 0123 hours, lasted exactly 4 minutes, originating from a low ridge, then descending into the valley. No discernible source. Precision of these observations lends credibility to the otherwise fantastical events. Beyond auditory phenomena, visual observations unnerved the men. Shadows flitted across fog shapes at the edge of vision. One scout, a figure not quite human, moved with intent, vanished before it could be observed clearly. Repeatedly, physical sighting and sound reinforced each other. Some journal entries hint at prior legends. Harper noted native guides spoke of voices in the trees. I dismissed it first. Yet tonight I recall their warning. There is truth in stories told long before we arrived. The blend of recorded fact and folklore begins to weave a more complex narrative. Across the patrol's log newspaper clippings and surviving correspondence, a consistent theme emerges: disciplined men trained for frontier survival, repeatedly confronted by an auditory and sometimes visual phenomenon that defies natural explanation. The fact layer, grounded in meticulous observation, forms a foundation upon which the legend of the screamer would grow. Long before Harper's scouts ever set foot in the Ozarks, the forests were alive with stories whispered by those who had come before. Native guides spoke of spirits, guardians of the woods, whose cries could freeze a man's blood and warp his perception. The settlers, too, carried tales passed down through generations, voices carried by the wind, shadows moving independently, men vanishing without trace. They called it the screamer of the wilderness, a presence that demanded respect, obedience, and sometimes sacrifice. Children were warned never to wander far, never to answer a voice that called their names from the trees. Hunters left offerings at the base of ancient oaks, sometimes food, sometimes tokens, in hopes of placating whatever dwelled unseen. Harper's journals reveal that the scouts had heard these legends, at first dismissing them. Yet the uncanny events they witnessed forced them to confront the possibility that the stories were true. The folklore became a lens through which they interpreted the inexplicable. Locals described incidents eerily similar to what Harper's patrol experienced: men hearing cries echoing from valleys, shadows that seemed to shift intentionally, and eerie footsteps where no one had walked. Reports of missing trappers and hunters spanned decades. Some tales suggested the screamer could mimic human voices, calling the unwary deeper into the forest. Harper himself noted in his journal the unsettling effect I hear familiar voices at night coaxing men from their posts. Yet no one stands there when approached. The folklore extended to visual phenomena. Eyewitnesses described eyes glowing faintly in the mist, shapes that elongated or contorted unnaturally, vanishing when focused upon. The line between reality and legend blurred. One account from a settler reads, "I saw a figure move through the fog, taller than any man, limbs bending in ways impossible. It stopped, stared, and vanished." Harper's notes echo these observations, lending credence to the persistence of such sightings. Many stories suggest that the screamer fed on fear, that the more terrified a man became, the closer and louder the cries would appear. Scouts reported that their pulse quickened, that shadows seemed to multiply as if sensing their terror. The entity was often associated with specific locations, deep hollows, ridges, and caves. Harper marked these areas repeatedly in his journal, noting the correlation between cries and landscape. Folklore had long warned these sites were sacred, cursed, or both. Some legends claimed the screamer could imitate the voices of lost companions. Men reported hearing calls of fellow scouts, friends, long absent, sometimes begging for help. The auditory illusions were precise, psychologically devastating. Harper recorded instances where entire patrols saw the same phenomena, yet each individual's description differed slightly. This echoed folklore tales that the screamer's form was mutable, perceptually tailored to each observer. Beyond auditory and visual, some folklore suggested a spiritual dimension. The screamer existed between worlds, bridging the living and the dead. Certain nights, according to legend, the cries were warnings. On others, they were punishment for trespassers. Harper's men began performing ritualistic acts reminiscent of local traditions, marking trees, whispering prayers, leaving small offerings. Whether protective or superstitious, these acts illustrate the psychological weight of folklore on human behavior. Some accounts claim the screamer could silence entire forests, extinguishing campfires, without wind causing rivers to ripple strangely, leaves to shift in unnatural patterns. Harper meticulously noted these details, sometimes sketching the terrain in his journal. Local settlers spoke of nights when families heard the cries across miles. Children's names were called, voices familiar yet twisted. Such stories, when combined with Harper's first-hand accounts, form a haunting continuity between folklore and observed events. Over time, the folklore shaped not just perception, but behavior. Scouts moved cautiously, hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The forest became a labyrinth of fear, where legend and observation reinforced each other. Some native stories describe the screamer as a guardian punishing disrespect or trespass. Others spoke of it as a collector of souls, feeding on the weak or the unwary. Harper recorded these warnings alongside his own observations, unsure how to reconcile myth and fact. The auditory phenomena often aligned with topographical features, valleys, ridges, and lowlands. Folklore insisted these were thresholds, places where the veil between worlds was thin. Harper's journals confirm repeated patterns at these locations. By the end of the patrol, the scouts were psychologically changed. Sleep-deprived, tense eyes scanning constantly. Their behavior echoed warnings in local folklore. Fear had become a tangible presence, shaping every movement. Even Harper, a man of reason and discipline, conceded the influence of legend. The forest speaks in a language I cannot name. The cries, the shadows. I can no longer dismiss the old tales. Fact and folklore intertwined, forming a tapestry of fear, awe, and mystery. Through these layers, the journal's letters, newspaper reports, oral histories, and persistent legends, the screamer of the wilderness emerges not only as a phenomenon, but as a symbol, a bridge between recorded history and myth. Its cries echo through time, leaving an indelible mark on those who hear them. The Ozarks were not alone in hosting such mysteries. Across the western frontier, reports emerged from distant forests and mountain ranges, echoing the same motif. Men disappearing, strange cries piercing the night shadows, moving against the wind. Singular disappearances, repeated patterns, recurring horror. Sergeant Harper and his men began drawing comparisons in their journals. References to prior expeditions, missing hunters, and unexplained phenomena in neighboring counties. The pattern suggested something far larger, something not confined to a single valley or ridge. In Kentucky's Cumberland woods, trappers spoke of the wailing thing, its cries chilling enough to drive seasoned woodsmen back to their cabins. Harper's journal notes mention hearing of similar accounts in Missouri, Arkansas, and even the distant Ozark foothills. The motif was unmistakable, a presence unseen, yet experienced across vast stretches of wilderness. Letters preserved from local settlers reveal whispers of repeated events. Families described hearing screams over miles, often synchronized with reported disappearances. It calls across the trees, one letter read, and those who answer, do not return. Such accounts connected the events of the Ozarks to a larger regional phenomenon. Harper noted that the behavior of the screamer, or whatever entity haunted the forests, was eerily consistent. It seemed to target groups traveling at night, exploiting isolation, fear, and fatigue. The repeated pattern suggested intelligence, or at the very least, a force, responding to human presence. Some oral histories describe a rule of avoidance. Certain nights were considered forbidden when no one dared travel the woods. Native guides spoke of the same motif, voices echoing from valleys' shadows that led men astray, vanishings that became cautionary tales for generations. Harper recorded these stories alongside his own observations, noting the uncanny parallels. Other explorers' journals corroborate Harper's accounts. A trapper in northern Arkansas writes, "I heard a cry like no animal I know. My companion disappeared. I ran back to camp. None believed me." The motif repeats a scream, a disappearance, a haunted landscape. Across decades, across locations. Even official reports show a pattern. Missing persons listed in frontier records, unexplained absences, patrols returning without men or with fragmented explanations. Singular disappearance, recurring auditory phenomena, unexplained psychological strain. The bridge between regions is undeniable. In essence, the bridge layer highlights the continuity of fear, a motif that spans geography and time. Whether known as the screamer in the Ozarks or the wailing spirit in other woods, the phenomena share traits: inhuman cries, vanishings, and a persistent, inescapable dread. Harper's final notes in this section reflect the unnerving realization it is not isolated. The cries, the disappearances, they follow patterns older than any patrol. We are part of a lineage of witnesses, a thread in the fabric of fear. The motif connects each encounter, creating a larger narrative beyond individual experience. Maps drawn by Harper and cross-referenced with other explorers' routes show the repeating pattern. Valley after valley, ridge after ridge. Locations of disappearances and auditory events overlap. Evidence of a recurring presence that transcends local superstition. Witness statements emphasize consistency in timing, behavior, and intensity. Screams heard near midnight, sometimes earlier. Shadows fleeting yet deliberate. Missing men found or not found under eerily similar circumstances. The pattern reinforces the motif, linking Ozarks to distant forests and past reports to present events. Even the weather seems to play a part. Calm nights, minimal wind, yet cries echo with unnatural clarity. Foggy valleys amplify the phenomenon, aligning with folklore that certain conditions allow spirits or entities to manifest more strongly. Harper's notes carefully mark these correlations. The bridge is also psychological. Scouts and settlers alike report that fear itself seems to attract the screamer. Men traveling in groups but consumed by dread notice the cries more intensely. The motif merges external and internal threat, forest and mind intertwined. Harper's journals describe attempts to rationalize the events. Cross-checking maps, checking for wildlife, reviewing prior patrols. Yet each investigation strengthens the recurring pattern. The bridge between separate events becomes undeniable, the motif persistent and haunting. Letters to frontier superiors reflect the same conclusion. Even officers removed from the forest note the pattern: repeated disappearances, unexplained sounds, shadows observed by multiple witnesses. Singular occurrences are never isolated. They are part of a larger design. The pattern extends beyond human perception. Some legends claim that those who hear the screamer repeatedly begin to see the forest differently. Shapes shift, sounds distort, boundaries between trees and shadows become fluid. Harper observes that even men of reason begin interpreting ordinary phenomena as part of the legend. Finally, the bridge sets the stage for the coming climax. The motif unites disparate events, creating a landscape where fear, observation, and legend converge. The screamer is no longer just an isolated forest mystery. It is a pattern, a force and entity whose presence is felt across time and space. The scouts are no longer merely observers, they are participants in a continuing chain of inexplicable events. The night descended with a suffocating stillness, the forest thick with mist and shadows. The kind of darkness that seemed almost liquid, wrapping around the scouts, constricting their senses. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made hearts pound in unison. The forest had taken on a new life, and it was watching them. Then it began the scream. Piercing, elongated, impossible to categorize. High-pitched, yet guttural, as if 1,000 voices had merged into one. It tore through the valley, bouncing off the cliffs, filling every corner of the scouts' awareness. Sergeant Harper scribbled furiously in his journal. It approaches, withdraws, yet never ceases. I cannot identify its source. We are not alone. Private Klein, already on edge from previous events, stepped into the mist to investigate a faint noise. Then silence. Only the echo of his own name returned. Panic swept through the patrol. Torches swung wildly, rifles raised. But there was nothing. No footprints, no struggle, no sign that a human had ever stood there. The scream seemed to respond to their fear. Every frantic movement made it retreat. Every hesitation drew it closer. The forest had a rhythm, and it toyed with them. Shadows stretched and warped unnaturally. Trees seemed to bend and twist. Forms appeared in peripheral vision, then vanished the moment one tried to focus. Jenkins, one of the scouts, later recounted seeing multiple figures simultaneously moving in impossible directions, each disappearing as they approached. Time became distorted. Seconds elongated into minutes. Minutes felt like hours. The forest seemed to manipulate perception, bending reality around them. More disappearances followed. Scattered personal items left behind. A rifle leaning against a tree, a dropped pack. Yet the men themselves were gone, as if the forest had consumed them. Harper's sketches marked the spots, annotated in red ink, gun and unpredictable. Shadows move independently. Cries mimic voices of missing men. His precision contrasted the impossibility of what he observed. Conflicting accounts fueled the terror. One scout claimed Klein vanished before their eyes. Another said he ran toward a form, only to recoil in horror. Each story amplified the other. Objects moved on their own. Packs shifted, rifles tipped, lanterns flickered without wind. The forest became an actor orchestrating fear. Another figure appeared. Taller than a man, limbs elongated, eyes glowing faintly through the fog. It vanished before any scout could approach, leaving only a broken branch as a signature. The cries began to take on rhythm, almost intentional. A pulse within the forest itself dictating the scouts' reactions, amplifying panic. Sleep-deprived and fearful, some men whispered prayers, others cursed. The forest responded only with more screams, closer, sharper, more intelligent. Klein's final disappearance was by a creek, Harper noted. He stepped into the mist, vanished. Only boots remained half submerged. The scream followed him mocking. Evidence remained, humans erased. Auditory illusions intertwined with visual distortions. Shadows, elongated forms, appeared and disappeared. The men questioned their own senses, unsure of reality. 2 scouts reported seeing the same figure simultaneously, yet descriptions conflicted. One saw a hunched humanoid, another a lanky, almost skeletal shape. Terror remained consistent, though perception differed. The forest manipulated sound and light. Fog thickened when approached, thinned when the men retreated. Even the movement of shadows seemed responsive to fear. Harper's men began to mimic native rituals instinctively, marking trees, whispering prayers, leaving offerings. Whether protective or superstitious fear now dictated behavior. Footsteps echoed where no one stood. Rustling leaves revealed no creature. The auditory and tactile environment became a maze of terror. Harper recorded the men's physical deterioration. Trembling hands, shallow breathing, rapid heartbeat. Exhaustion combined with unrelenting fear. The forest seemed to communicate, almost teasing the patrol. Distant cries echoed with the timbre of the missing men's voices, calling, beckoning, taunting. One scout swore he saw movement in the firelight. Forms rising from the mist, dissipating before he could aim. The forest itself became a stage of the unexplainable. A second disappearance occurred near a ridge. Boots left behind no tracks leading away. Only silence punctuated by the haunting wail. Harper documented inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts. Some men saw movement, others claimed hearing footsteps. Yet all agreed on the screams. Truth fragmented, yet undeniable. The phenomenon seemed to respond to psychological state. Fear magnified perception, transforming mundane shadows into agents of terror. Objects again shifted. Packs, rifles, even small personal effects. The scouts' mental state deteriorated with each inexplicable event. The wails now seemed intelligent, modulating in pitch duration direction, almost mimicking responses to the scouts' actions. Even daylight offered no relief. Shadows still moved unnaturally, the forest retaining an oppressive vigilance. By early morning, the patrol was shattered. Whispers, trembling eyes darting constantly, every man permanently altered by what they had witnessed. Harper's journal closes the night with a haunting observation. We survived, yet we are not free. The cries linger. I hear them in my sleep. The forest has claimed a part of us. The climax merges fact and legend. Observed vanishings, auditory phenomena, visual distortions. The screamer has become both force and symbol, leaving material traces, fragmented accounts, and a dread that refuses explanation. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive with a consciousness impossible to quantify. Every scream, every shadow, every disappearance reinforced the presence of the inhuman. Even seasoned frontier men trained in survival and observation could not reconcile what they saw with the laws of nature. Fear became a tangible, inescapable entity. Personal items remained behind, like breadcrumbs. Rifles, boots, hats, markers of human existence, now ghostly relics. The screamer erased the human form, but left a signature. Harper's observations illustrate a psychological and physical transformation. Men huddled, hyper-aware, unwilling to separate from group. The forest had asserted dominance over both mind and body. The climax ends with unresolved terror. The patrol survives in part, but the screamer's presence remains. A pattern, a force, a mystery that stretches beyond one night, echoing in journals, letters, and legend. Dawn breaks over the Ozarks, but the forest holds its secrets tight. Mist still clings to the valleys, curling around tree trunks, as if reluctant to release the night's horrors. The cries of the screamer, though diminished in volume, linger in memory, echoing in the minds of those who survived. The patrol emerges, haggard, pale, yet alive. Each man bears the invisible scars of the night. Eyes haunted, hands trembling, voices hesitant. They speak little of what happened, knowing that words could not fully capture what they witnessed. Harper's journals, preserved in fragments, record the final hours. Sketches of the mist-shrouded forest. Annotations of disappearances, notes on shadows and sounds. A meticulous record of events that official reports barely hint at. A silent testimony to the inexplicable. Even daylight reveals the forest differently. Trees seem taller, shadows longer. Every rustle in the wind carries a memory of screams past. A landscape that appears normal, yet remains deeply altered by what occurred under its canopy. Settlers and scouts alike would recall stories for decades. Whispers of voices in the trees, warnings of disappearances, shapes at the edge of vision. Each retelling adds to the legend, blending fact and folklore into a tapestry impossible to untangle. Some local guides warned of nights when the screamer's cries are strongest, of paths to avoid, hollows not to enter, and ridges where the lost can be glimpsed but never approached. The forest is no longer just terrain. It is a living, watching entity. Even Harper, a man of reason and discipline, acknowledged the limits of understanding. We cannot name it. We cannot see it fully. Yet its presence is undeniable. It is alive in a manner beyond our comprehension. The words linger, echoing the uncertainty and terror of the event. The forest holds lessons as well as warnings. Fear itself becomes a companion, guiding, shaping behavior, altering perception. The screamer, whether creature spirit or force of nature, embodies this lesson. Material evidence remains fragmented. Boots, half-buried rifles leaning against trees, sketches of impossible forms, signs of human presence erased yet recorded in meticulous detail. Shadows and screams persist, as witnesses even without human eyes. As days turn to weeks, the memory of that night continues to haunt. Dreams replay the cries. Shadows move across walls and floors. The Ozarks are never quite the same for those who walked its haunted trails. Historians and folklorists have pieced together accounts, journals, newspaper clippings, attempting to separate fact from myth. Yet the pattern persists: disappearances, inhuman cries, vanished men. The screamer leaves its mark on history, whether one believes in legend or reality. The pattern repeats across time and space. Other forests, other regions. Voices that echo, shadows that twist, disappearances that remain unexplained. The motif is persistent, universal, inescapable. And the question remains: how much of what we consider real is influenced by fear? How much is shaped by legend? And how many of those cries, those vanishings, are yet waiting still? Somewhere in the woods, for another patrol, another night, another witness, the screamer of the wilderness does not reveal itself fully. It leaves fragments, traces, impressions, enough to terrorize, to puzzle, to haunt, yet never enough to fully understand. So the forest keeps its secrets, and perhaps it always will. Each scream that pierces the canopy is a warning, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unresolved. For those who hear the tales, consider the warnings. Respect the forest, heed the cries in the night, and perhaps you too will leave with only your shadow, while the screamer claims what cannot be seen. You have just witnessed another account from the archives of the unexplained. If you wish to uncover more, to step closer to the edge of history and legend, subscribe, follow, and continue walking the line between reality and myth. And remember, the next scream could be anywhere, anytime, waiting, listening for you.